Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Millennial Revolt, an independent political talk show that seeks to bring a different narrative than the stale one we have going on right now in the mainstream media. So, today we're going to be talking about fake news again, because I think it's extremely important that we talk about it because the mainstream media is doubling down, and now you have politicians in our government as well as in Europe trying to basically censor what they deem as fake news to basically control the narrative and the flow of information that they want the American people and as well as Western Europeans to know. And it's extremely dangerous given the massive disinformation campaign that's currently happening. So there's so much to discuss, so let's just get right into it. So I made a video either last month or the month before where President Obama was speaking at a panel discussion where he was talking about the internet and how he started talking about what he called we need a truthiness test because people aren't believing basically what the mainstream media is saying. Now, after the election, and we saw all of the mainstream media, either in our country and abroad, basically trying to tip the election in Hillary Clinton's favor, painting Donald Trump, rightly or wrongly, as the next Hitler. Fascism is coming to the United States. There's basically going to be brown shirts marching through the streets, minorities, Black people, Hispanic people, gays, lesbians, all of us are going to be put into camps. It was just real fear-mongering on a level which I have never seen before in my lifetime. And I'm only 24 years old. I'm not that old. So the American people rejected and didn't listen to them. And they dealt a decisive blow to these people's credibility, which has already been waning for the years. People have been noticing that they were lying. But what has happened because of Hillary Clinton's loss and the fact that they have lost credibility, they have doubled down on their fake news message. They have doubled down on saying that the Russians have been involved in our election. Though they can point to no place where this has actually happened, they can't even say that the Russians hacked John Podesta's emails. They can't say anything. They just say, well, intelligence sources tell us that the Russians were involved. And it's not only Democrats who are doing this. You have Senator Lindsey Graham, who I cannot stand, and he should be voted out of office, doubling down on this, saying we need to investigate what the Russians did in our election, though there's no evidence of this at all. Now, what you see in the European Union, they are passing laws to try to what they call stop Russian disinformation. They are comparing RT, which is Russia Today, as bad as ISIS, Daesh, the beheaders in Syria. Now, the U.S. is engaged in this type of behavior as well, passing bills on what they call Russian propaganda, fake news, or Russian disinformation. Now, in my last video, Fake News Hysteria, I talked about an article in which the Washington Post launched a witch hunt against what they called Russian propaganda and fake news outlets, basically targeting conservative outlets as well as liberal news outlets who were critical of Hillary Clinton as well as U.S. foreign policy, and they labeled them tools of the Kremlin. Now, recently, with 390 votes, the House passed Bill H.R. 6393, which is the Intelligence Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 2017. It was sponsored by California Republican Devin Nunes, whose third largest donor in 2016 is the Google parent company Alphabet Inc. Now, do you see the connection? Google recently said that they would change its algorithms to combat what they called fake news. A bill which deals with a number of intelligence-related issues includes Russian propaganda, or what the government calls propaganda, and hints at a potential crackdown on offenders. Now, this worries me because I, as well as many other YouTubers on YouTube, we do political commentary. There's a certain provision in the bill, Title V, which is matters relating to foreign countries, whose Section 501 calls for the government to counter active measures by Russia to exert covert influence carried out in coordination with or at the behest of political leaders or the security services of the Russian Federation, and the role of the Russian Federation has been hidden or not acknowledged by the public. The section lists the following definitions on what they call media manipulation. 1. Establishment or funding of a front group. 2. Covert broadcasting. 3. Media manipulation. 4. Disinformation and forgeries. 5. Funding agents of influence. 6. Incitement or offensive counterintelligence. 7. Assassinations. And 8. Terrorist acts. Now, if this law is passed by the Senate and signed by the president, this could be used to target, threaten, or eliminate what they call fake news websites, a list which has been used to arbitrarily define any website or blog that does not share the mainstream media's proclivity to serve as the public relations arm of each given administration. And so it doesn't matter if it's a Democratic administration or it's a Republican administration. We see that our news media organizations, whether it's Fox, MSNBC, CNN, NBC News, whatever one it is, they each toe the line of the State Department, basically. The bill, which was passed on November 30th, was introduced on November 22nd, two days before the Washington Post published its November 24th article citing experts who claim Russian propaganda helped Donald Trump get elected. In the article that has been widely blasted, the Washington Post wrote that 2 teams of independent researchers found that Russians exploited American-made technology platforms to attack U.S. democracy at a particularly vulnerable moment, as an insurgent candidate harassed a wide range of grievances to claim the White House. So it wasn't Hillary Clinton being a terrible candidate. It wasn't the mainstream media who was openly supporting Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the hit pieces that the New York Times or the Washington Post or many of these liberal news organizations were basically writing about Donald Trump. It wasn't any of this. It was Russian propaganda. It was people from the Kremlin that tipped the election in his favor. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Now, on a side note, the EU is also doing this as well. The EU, which is the European Union, has also voted to basically pass laws that are critical of the European Union's policies and to combat what they call fake news. Now, it seems that the European Union has effectively declared war on anti-establishment information as a wave of populism which threatens the superstate's survival. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has now joined President Obama in speaking out against what they call fake news, saying that misinformation was manipulating public opinion on the internet. She also said that the growth of movements critical of her policies have been caused by these fake news sites. Well, it wouldn't be her lobbying Facebook to shut down speech, which she deems hate speech, anyone who's critical of the migrant crisis, where she let in 1 million undocumented people into her country who are now raping her countrymen and women, who are now assaulting and murdering them. It wouldn't be because of that. It wouldn't be her cracking down on actual German citizens when they are criticizing and complaining about this. Like, look, we were hospitable, we took these people in, but they're not assimilating into our culture. They're hurting our people, and we need to do something about it. These people are labeled as Nazis. They're thrown in jail. They're either arrested, and this is happening all over the EU. The most progressive country in the world, which is Sweden, is becoming increasingly right-wing because of the lunacy of some of these progressives who have taken office in Sweden. There is a reason why it is increasingly becoming right-wing. This is not on accident. When you start censoring people and not allowing people to speak out and say, look, this is what's happening, then you're going to have these issues. Now, Merkel, whose opposing party is set to make major gains in the next German election, which is the AfD, which is an anti-EU party, which opposes Angela Merkel's migrant policies and is quickly gaining in all of the polls, are said to get in the Bundestag, the Germans' main national parliament, next next year. Merkel launched Europe's war against fake news. The European Parliament just passed a resolution that calls for the EU to respond to information warfare, particularly Russian propaganda, from alternative news websites like Russia Today. And I find that Russia Today is doing amazing coverage on the Syrian war, better than half of all these channels. Pravda is doing amazing coverage as well. CCTV does good coverage on the Syrian war against the United States as well as Western Europe, who is openly supporting terrorists. It's insane. RT, which receives Russian government funding, RT and Sputnik news agencies were directly named as the most dangerous tools of Russian propaganda. The resolution blames Moscow for the rise of populism in Europe, saying that by providing viewpoints that diverge from the corporate media's narrative, it has sought to incite fear and divide Europe. Now, you know what has sought to divide Europe? Angela Merkel, and as well as the European Union passing austerity measures, which has basically collapsed most of southern Europe, which you've seen a million migrants being driven into Europe. You've seen right-wing parties rising. Why? Because people are broke, people are tired, they can't speak out about what's going on. They see their countrymen and women being raped in mass, and this is happening all over. And you can't talk about this because you'll be named a racist, you'll be named a Nazi, you'll be named a xenophobe. You see BBC and Sky News and The Guardian do this shit all the time. It's ridiculous. The resolution also mentioned Russia's media organizations alongside terror groups such as the Islamic State, which led several MEPs to call the resolution ridiculous and fostering anti-Russian hysteria. As a result of the resolution's passage, EU member states are expected to boost financing for counter-propaganda projects. So what that basically means is they're going to start a government-funded news program or government-funded news outlets to basically counter what they call Russian propaganda, what they call fake news, because people aren't believing what they're telling them. It's similar to what we have here with MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, the Washington Post, or even the taxpayer-funded Voice of America, which is actually funded by us and is government propaganda. Now, earlier in the spring, many U.S. tech mega companies, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Microsoft, all signed a code of conduct pledge promising the European Union they would work with an unelected EU Commission to sanction, criminalize individual perpetrators of hate speech online. In addition, these companies have signed up to promote independent counter-narratives favored by the EU. Justice Commissioner Vera Jourova told the Financial Times, "If Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Microsoft want to convince me and the other ministers that the non-legislative approach can work, they will have to act quickly and make a strong effort in the coming months. The last weeks and months have shown that social media companies need to live up to their important role and take up their share of responsibility when it comes to the phenomena like online radicalization, illegal hate speech, or fake news." Now, hate speech has been loosely defined and it can be used to censor free speech online. And we all know that fake news has been made into a huge umbrella that is now encompassing all of what alternative media is. And it should come as no surprise to anyone that the EU wants to censor what they call fake news because they blame it for Brexit and the potential of other EU countries like Italy who might decide to leave the EU because it is currently failing. That's just happening in Europe. But this has been happening for the past couple of years in the US. But for decades, there have been anti-propaganda laws that have prevented the US government from using its broadcasting arm from delivering programming to the American people. But back in 2013, those laws came to an end. The result was thousands of hours per week of government-funded radio and TV programs for domestic U.S. consumption in a reform initially criticized as a green light for U.S. domestic propaganda efforts. The restriction of these broadcasting networks, such as Voice of America, Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty, and the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, was due to the Smith-Mundt Act, which is a long-standing piece of legislation that has been amended numerous times over the years. Now, Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright, in the 1970s, Fulbright was no friend to Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, and moved to restrict them from domestic distribution, saying that they should be given the opportunity to take their rightful place in the graveyard of Cold War relics. Fulbright's amendment to Smith-Mundt was bolstered in 1985 by Nebraska Senator Edward Zornsky, who argued that such propaganda should be kept out of America as to distinguish the U.S. from the Soviet Union, where domestic propaganda is a principal government activity. Zornsky and Fulbright sold their amendments by basically saying the American people should not be paying for state-run propaganda by our government. The amendment to the Smith-Mundt bill, which was passed back in 2012 as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, made it legal for the use of propaganda on American audiences. The amendment would strike the current ban of domestic dissemination of propaganda material produced by the State Department and the Independent Broadcasting Board of Governors. The tweak of this bill would essentially neutralize two previous acts, the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 and the Foreign Relations Authorization Act in 1987, that has been passed to protect U.S. audiences from the U.S. government's misinformation campaigns. The bipartisan amendment was sponsored by Representative Mac Thornberry from Texas and Representative Adam Smith from Washington State. Representative Mac Thornberry argued that when the bill was passed back in 2012, that in the internet age, the current law ties the hands of Americans' diplomatic officials, military, and others by inhibiting our ability to effectively communicate in a credible way. The bill supporters say the informational material used overseas to influence foreign audiences is too good to not use at home, and that the new techniques are needed to help fight Al-Qaeda, a borderless enemy whose own propaganda reaches Americans online. Back in 2014, the U.S. International Communications Reform Act, which passed out of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, would, among other things, make clear that Voice of America's mission is to support U.S. public diplomacy efforts. According to the summary of the bill's author says that over time, Voice of America has abandoned the mission outlined in its charter to provide a clear and effective presentation of the policies of the United States of America. So, I don't understand the criticism that is coming out of the United States when they get mad at, say, RT, which is directly funded by the Russian government and is broadcasted in different languages, when the United States is doing the same thing. The hypocrisy kills me. So the effort by the U.S. government and our mainstream media to engage in massive disinformation campaigns have been going on for years, and it has barely been talked about and barely even been noticed by anyone. Now, when alternative media has taken up the mantle on what a free and independent press is supposed to be, they are attacking us in full force. You see people being banned from Twitter. You see people's videos and channels being taken down on YouTube. You know, it's a scary time we're living in, where you have to be really afraid of telling the truth. You know, George Orwell had a quote, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act," because you see what's going on. You know, the U.S. has been doing this for years, apparently, engaging in massive disinformation campaigns. I didn't even know half of all of the stuff that was happening. The European Union, Western Europe, is engaging in this right now. So the more that the mainstream media, as well as our newspapers and politicians, continue to blather on about fake news, is they're just going to make alternative media stronger. So that's a good thing. But the bad thing about all of this is, and the thing that worries me the most, is they keep blaming Russia for everything. They keep trying to say that Russia is influencing their countries, when it's actually the politicians and their horrible decisions that are forcing the populace of each of these countries to turn away and not listen to the lies that are being espoused to them. Now, the danger about all of this is even though Donald Trump was elected and we didn't get Hillary Clinton in the White House, you still have Congress. You still have the neocons in Congress and these neoliberals who seem to be pushing and continuously antagonizing Russia. And this isn't a good thing. This could lead to war. And no matter how much President-elect Trump wants détente, my fear is that the neocons and neoliberals in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate will never let this happen. You see what's happening in the European Union and Angela Merkel claiming that Russia is going to interfere in the German elections. You see the European Union passing resolutions claiming that RT is as dangerous as ISIS. You see our own congressman doing this. Recently, Lindsey Graham recently came out saying we need to see if the Russians interfered in our elections. It's just a bunch of horse shit, and we just have to be vigilant. We have to be aware. We need to understand that they are censoring things. People's YouTube channels are getting censored. People are being thrown off of Twitter. So we just need to be aware. I'm the Millennial Revolt. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you have a wonderful day. Bye.